Engaging the Modern Skeptic, Rhetoric, Tactics, and Classical Apologetics. Effective engagement with skeptics in contemporary digital and interpersonal contexts necessitates a combination of intellectual rigor, philosophical preparation, and emotional resilience. This guide is intended for evangelicals who most frequently encounter untrained skeptics in online debates, social media interactions, YouTube comment sections, or street conversations. Such individuals often rely on emotional appeals, mockery, or rapid-fire objections, rather than formal academic arguments. For example, a typical skeptic might comment online, "If God is real, why doesn't he just show himself like any other fact in science?" Or dismissively compare belief in God to belief in the tooth fairy. Although trained philosophers and scientists on both sides may pose sophisticated challenges, most believers typically encounter popular-level skepticism shaped by new atheist rhetoric and prevailing cultural narratives. In these scenarios, preparation that emphasizes practical tactics and accessible evidence is essential. When engaging in these discussions, whether online or in person, apologists should be prepared to address specific behavioral tactics and present robust, systematically structured arguments that directly challenge the naturalistic worldview. Thanks for reading. Subscribe for free to receive new posts and support my work. 1. The Rhetoric and Tactics of the Modern Atheist. The New Atheism movement, popularized by figures such as Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett, fundamentally altered the tone of atheistic discourse. This movement shifted the atheistic posture from polite philosophical disagreement to an active crusade to eradicate religious belief. When engaging a skeptic shaped by this cultural wave, one should anticipate several distinct rhetorical tactics, especially in the fast-paced, often emotional environment of online or street encounters. A common strategy among contemporary atheists is to portray religious belief as indicative of intellectual deficiency. Richard Dawkins has publicly encouraged his followers to forego politeness and to mock and ridicule religious individuals. Apologists frequently encounter comparisons between belief in God and belief in mythological entities such as the tooth fairy or the flying spaghetti monster. Additionally, biblical authors are often characterized as Bronze Age figures who fabricated myths due to a lack of scientific understanding. Christopher Hitchens advanced the claim that religion poisons everything and constitutes a celestial dictatorship. It is important to recognize that such rhetoric often serves as a smokescreen intended to provoke or signal intellectual superiority rather than to present substantive arguments. In online environments, these tactics can quickly undermine productive discourse if not appropriately managed. The Gish Gallop and Emotional Grievances. The Gish Gallop is a debate tactic in which a participant rapidly presents a large number of objections, fallacies, and grievances within a short time frame. This approach exploits the fact that refuting false claims requires significantly more time than making them, with the intent of exhausting the apologist's time or patience and enabling the skeptic to claim victory over unresolved points. In both online and live discussions, skeptics may abruptly shift between topics, such as Old Testament laws and the problem of evil, aiming to overwhelm the Christian response. According to apologist Frank Turek, skeptics often lack coherent logical arguments against the existence of God and instead express emotional grievances about divine governance. Recognizing this tactic enables apologists to remain focused and respond methodically, rather than being diverted by numerous tangential objections. The lack of belief dodge. A frequent strategy in contemporary debates is to define atheism solely as a lack of belief in God, thereby attempting to shift the entire burden of proof onto the theist. This approach is insufficient in discussions about the nature of reality. When atheists assert that the universe is eternal, that it originated from nothing, or that consciousness and morality are products of unguided evolutionary processes, they are making positive truth claims. As Turek observes, lacking a belief constitutes a psychological state and does not address external reality, rendering it equivalent to lacking an argument. In informal discussions, highlighting this distinction can redirect the conversation toward the skeptic's actual assertions. Scientism and the demand for empirical evidence. Skeptics often demand repeatable, empirical evidence for the existence of God, asserting that science is the sole means of discovering truth. This reliance on scientism and methodological naturalism presupposes that only the physical, material world exists. Requesting material evidence for a spaceless, timeless, immaterial God constitutes a category error, as Christian theology maintains that God is not a physical entity within the universe. Moreover, scientism is philosophically self-defeating, since the claim that we should only believe what can be scientifically proven cannot itself be substantiated by scientific means. This approach is particularly prevalent when skeptics argue that science has explained everything and that belief in God is unnecessary. 2. The Christian's posture and strategy. Anticipating the skeptic's methodology informs the appropriate response. The apologist's aim is not solely to prevail in rhetorical exchanges, but to reveal inconsistencies within the naturalistic worldview while exemplifying Christian grace. This approach is particularly important in emotionally charged online or personal interactions where escalation can occur rapidly. Maintain a gracious steelman methodology. Apologists must avoid returning insults. High-profile scholars like John Lennox exemplify the steelman methodology, engaging opponents by addressing their arguments at their strongest point and responding with scientific data, historical evidence, and philosophical rigor while maintaining genuine grace. By remaining composed and academic, apologists can reveal the superficiality of emotional rhetoric and foster constructive dialogue. In digital environments, this approach can de-escalate tensions and demonstrate the rationality that skeptics often claim to value. Expose the stealing from God dynamic. Atheists frequently steal from the theistic worldview to argue against it. To launch their critiques, they must rely on causality, reason, information, and objective morality, concepts that lack a foundational basis in a universe consisting exclusively of molecules in motion. By demonstrating that outrage over the problem of evil requires an objective standard of good, which in turn requires transcendent grounding, the apologist shows that the naturalistic worldview cannot sustain its own moral complaints. This line of reasoning is particularly effective when skeptics appeal to morality or meaning while denying any transcendent source. When skeptics present sweeping relativistic claims, apologists can respond by demonstrating the self-defeating nature of such statements. For example, if an opponent asserts there are no absolute truths, it is effective to inquire, is that absolutely true? This approach compels the skeptic to confront the necessity of objective truth. When applied thoughtfully, this tactic is effective in conversational settings without appearing pedantic. 3. The arsenal, essential proofs. To establish that Christian theism offers the most reasonable explanation of reality, apologists should construct a cumulative, circumstantial case utilizing arguments that address the specific questions raised by untrained skeptics. Arguments related to the origin of life and biological complexity are particularly effective, as they directly challenge the assertion that science has explained life and the universe without any need for God. This section examines key insights from synthetic organic chemist James Tour on the origin of life, philosopher of science Stephen Meyer on intelligent design in biology, and the enduring moral and historical arguments. Challenges to a naturalistic origin of life, insights from James Tour. For many skeptics, the assertion that life originated naturally from non-living chemicals through unguided processes is a foundational aspect of their worldview. However, synthetic organic chemist Dr. James Tour of Rice University has emphasized the significant chemical challenges that remain unresolved. Tour emphasizes that despite decades of research and substantial investment, scientists have not demonstrated a plausible prebiotic chemical pathway capable of producing life from non-life under realistic early Earth conditions. Major unresolved challenges include achieving and sustaining homochirality, the exclusive use of left-handed amino acids and right-handed sugars essential to life through random chemical processes. Forming long functional polymers such as proteins and RNA without the highly controlled conditions and intelligent intervention typical of laboratory experiments. Accounting for the origin of biological information and the specified complexity required for even the simplest living systems. Tour consistently observes that prominent origin of life experiments often rely on purified reagents, artificial laboratory conditions, and substantial human intervention, factors that would not have been present on early Earth. While these points do not constitute a deductive proof of design, they pose substantial challenges to the prevailing narrative that abiogenesis is a resolved or straightforward scientific issue. When skeptics assert that science has shown how life began without God, Tour's analysis offers chemistry-based reasons to examine such claims more critically and to encourage further investigation of the evidence. The Case for Intelligent Design in Biology, Stephen Meyer. Building upon the difficulties facing unguided chemical origins, philosopher of science Dr. Stephen Meyer offers a positive argument for intelligent design grounded in biological information and the fossil record. In Signature in the Cell, Meyer argues that the digital code in DNA represents specified functional information closely analogous to computer code or written language. Chance and physical necessity alone have not been demonstrated to produce this level of complex, specified information. Consistently, only intelligent agents are observed to generate such information-rich systems. Consequently, Meyer concludes that the most plausible explanation for the origin of biological information is an intelligent cause. In Darwin's Doubt, Meyer turns to the Cambrian explosion in the fossil record, during which most major animal body plans appear abruptly without clear gradual precursors from earlier strata. This event required a massive, rapid increase in genetic and epigenetic information. Standard neo-Darwinist mechanisms, random mutation filtered by natural selection, have not been shown to generate the required information within the available geological time. Meyer concludes that intelligent design provides the most causally adequate explanation for both the origin of life's information and the subsequent explosions of biological complexity observed in the history of life. The arguments presented by Tour and Meyer provide apologists with tools to engage skeptics who cite evolution or science as comprehensive explanations for life. These arguments redirect the discussion from abstract cosmological issues to specific questions of chemistry, information, and biological history, areas in which many untrained skeptics are more likely to participate. When a skeptic claims science has proven life arose naturally, a concise response could be, chemist James Tour points out that after decades of research, we still lack any plausible prebiotic pathway for the origin of life under realistic conditions. The chemical hurdles are enormous. The moral argument. The moral argument challenges the skeptic's capacity to serve as an objective moral judge of the universe. When skeptics reference the problem of evil to critique the morality of God, they rely on a foundation that their own worldview does not substantiate. 1. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. 2. Objective moral values and duties do exist. 3. Therefore, God exists. Within an atheistic framework, humans are considered accidental products of undirected natural processes. Philosopher Michael Roos acknowledges that if naturalism is correct, morality is merely a biological adaptation for survival, and any deeper meaning is illusory. Under atheism, the actions of Mother Teresa and Adolf Hitler would be morally indistinguishable in an objective sense. Recognizing a crooked line presupposes knowledge of a straight line. Similarly, objective evil cannot exist without an ultimate, unchanging standard of goodness, identified as the nature of God. In everyday discourse, this argument effectively highlights the inconsistency of skeptics who appeal to moral outrage while rejecting any transcendent moral foundation. The historical argument for the resurrection. To bridge the gap between a general theistic creator and the God of Christianity, the apologist must appeal to historical evidence. This can be accomplished using the minimal facts approach championed by scholars like Dr. Gary Habermas and Dr. Michael Licona. This approach relies exclusively on historical data granted by the vast majority of critical, secular, and liberal New Testament scholars. Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. 2. His tomb was discovered empty by a group of his female followers. 3. Multiple individuals and groups experienced post-mortem appearances of Jesus. 4. The original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe Jesus was resurrected, remaining willing to suffer and die for this belief. All naturalistic theories, including hypotheses such as the disciples stealing the body, mass hallucinations, or the swoon theory, lack sufficient historical explanatory power. The most comprehensive explanation for the available data is that God raised Jesus from the dead. This argument is particularly effective with skeptics who acknowledge Jesus as a historical figure but reject the resurrection as a myth. For skeptics who accept Jesus as a historical teacher but reject the resurrection, one effective reply is, even many skeptical historians grant the crucifixion, the empty tomb discovery by women, the post-mortem appearances, and the disciples' transformed lives. The best explanation for all four facts together remains the resurrection. Conclusion. When engaging with a hostile or emotionally driven skeptic, it is important to recognize the encounter as a confrontation between fundamental worldviews. Atheism is not the default position of pure reason. Rather, it is a worldview that posits that nothing produced everything, that life emerged from non-life through unguided chemistry, and that blind materialistic processes generated objective morality and consciousness. By systematically presenting arguments concerning the origin of life, biological design, and supporting moral and historical evidence, apologists can reveal the limitations of the naturalistic framework in typical conversations. The ultimate objective is to remove intellectual obstacles so that the core claims of the Christian worldview can be clearly understood and considered. To strengthen your ability to apply these arguments effectively, consider taking practical steps such as discussing common objections and responses in small groups, role-playing skeptical challenges with fellow apologists, or practicing your answers in real or simulated online forums. Regular practice in realistic settings will not only increase confidence, but also help refine your communication and deepen your understanding of both the arguments and the underlying worldview issues. Quick reference for common encounters. When facing mockery or tooth fairy comparisons, briefly steelman the objection, then pivot. I understand the comparison, but the historical and philosophical case for God is quite different. Let's look at the origin of life. That's a lot of points. Which one matters most to you right now? Let's focus there. When told science has explained life, reference Tour and Mayer concisely. When morality is raised, calmly present the moral argument syllogism.